Wait, do not rush past this moment. Something unusual is moving beneath the surface of your story, and if you listen carefully, you may recognize why this message found you today. Not long ago, a private meeting took place. No announcements. No audience. No dramatic scene. Just a quiet conversation behind closed doors where your name unexpectedly became the center of attention. And what makes this moment remarkable is not simply that your soulmate spoke about you. It is what happened when they did. Picture this for a moment. A room filled with uncertainty. Questions hanging in the air. Thoughts that had remained unspoken for far too long. Your soulmate sat there carrying emotions they had struggled to explain, feelings that seemed larger than logic itself. For a while they remained silent. They listened. They observed. Yet the more the conversation unfolded, the more impossible it became to avoid the truth. Someone finally asked the question. What is it about this person? A simple question. But the answer changed everything. For a brief moment, the room became completely still. Your soulmate searched for words. Not because they had nothing to say, but because what they felt could not easily be described. How do you explain a connection that keeps returning to your mind when the world becomes quiet? How do you explain the feeling that someone you've never fully understood somehow understands parts of you that nobody else sees? The conversation continued. One person believed you were simply another chapter. Another believed you were something much more. And as opinions moved back and forth across the room, your soulmate remained focused on a single realization. Every path they imagined somehow led back to you. Pause here for a second. Have you ever wondered why certain people appear in our lives at exactly the right moment? Not early. Not late. Exactly when something inside us is ready to awaken. That question surfaced during the meeting. Not directly. But through every word that was spoken. The surprising part is that nobody there was discussing your appearance. Nobody was discussing status. Nobody was discussing temporary circumstances. Instead, they spoke about impact. The impact you've had without even realizing it. The way your presence seemed to inspire reflection. The way certain choices you've made revealed strength that others rarely show. The way your energy seemed different from what people expected. And little by little, the discussion transformed. What began as a conversation about you became a conversation about possibility. Because every time someone raised a doubt, another person brought forward a reason to believe. Every time uncertainty appeared, another observation emerged that challenged it. Your soulmate listened carefully. They heard things they had secretly been thinking for months. Thoughts they had never shared aloud. Thoughts that suddenly sounded different when spoken by someone else. Stay a little longer because this is where the story becomes interesting. At one point, someone asked a question that completely shifted the atmosphere. What if this connection is preparing both of you for something neither of you can see yet? Nobody answered immediately. The silence itself became an answer. Because deep down, everyone in that room sensed that this situation was larger than ordinary attraction. There was a feeling that pieces were moving into place. Slowly. Quietly. Almost invisibly. And while nobody claimed to know the future, something remarkable happened. The conversation stopped focusing on obstacles. It started focusing on potential. Your soulmate noticed that change. They noticed how quickly fear disappeared when genuine understanding entered the room. And for the first time in a long while, they stopped asking themselves whether this connection mattered. Instead, they began wondering how significant it might actually become. But the meeting was far from over. Because just when it seemed the discussion had reached its most important moment, someone revealed an observation about you that nobody expected to hear. An observation so unexpected that it completely changed the direction of the conversation. And when your soulmate heard those words, they could not stop thinking about them. Not during the meeting. Not afterward. Not even now. Because those words carried a truth that would follow them long after the room became empty. And that truth is exactly where our story continues. Something shifted the moment those unexpected words entered the room. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. Yet everyone present felt it. The atmosphere changed as though an invisible curtain had been pulled back, revealing a perspective nobody had considered before. The observation was simple. "You know," someone said thoughtfully, "the most interesting thing about this person isn't what they do. It's what happens to people around them." For a second, nobody responded. Then the conversation deepened. Because once that statement was spoken, examples began appearing from every direction. Small moments. Quiet details. Things that seemed insignificant on their own but became powerful when connected together. Your soulmate listened carefully. They heard stories about your resilience. Stories about your patience. Stories about times when you continued moving forward even when circumstances gave you every reason to stop. What surprised them most was not the information itself. It was the consistency. Different perspectives. Different experiences. Different observations. Yet somehow they all pointed toward the same conclusion. There was something authentic about you. Something difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. And suddenly your soulmate found themselves remembering moments they had almost forgotten. Conversations. Unexpected coincidences. Little details that once seemed ordinary. Now they appeared completely different. Have you ever looked back at a chapter of your life and realized it was telling a story you couldn't see while living it? That realization began unfolding inside them. Slowly. Quietly. Powerfully. The private meeting was no longer about gathering opinions. It was becoming a mirror. A mirror reflecting truths your soulmate had been avoiding. One person leaned forward and asked a question that instantly captured everyone's attention. What if this connection keeps returning because it still has somewhere to go? The room fell silent again. Not because nobody had an answer. Because everyone was considering the possibility. Your soulmate especially. For so long they had tried to analyze everything logically. Measure every feeling. Explain every emotion. Predict every outcome. Yet this question could not be solved through logic alone. Some experiences refuse to fit inside neat explanations. Some connections continue appearing because they carry unfinished meaning. And that idea stayed with them. If you've reached this moment of the journey, take a second and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations begin with a single comment. And if these messages continue finding you at exactly the right time, subscribing simply helps you stay connected to future chapters of the story. Now listen closely. Because the most surprising part of the meeting had not happened yet. As the discussion continued, someone who had remained mostly quiet finally spoke. Everyone turned toward them. They rarely offered opinions. When they did, people listened. And what they said changed everything. I don't think this is about finding someone perfect. The room became still. I think this is about finding someone real. Those words landed differently. Because perfection had never been the reason your soulmate kept thinking about you. It was never about perfection. It was about recognition. The feeling that beneath all the noise, expectations, and distractions of life, there was something genuine. Something rare. Something increasingly difficult to find. The conversation began moving in a direction nobody expected. Instead of discussing what might go wrong, they started discussing what might go right. Instead of focusing on uncertainty, they explored possibility. And for the first time that evening, your soulmate stopped defending their feelings internally. They stopped questioning every instinct. They stopped treating their heart like a problem that needed solving. What happened next surprised even them. They began speaking. Openly. Honestly. More honestly than anyone expected. Thoughts that had remained hidden for months finally found words. Feelings that had been carefully protected finally surfaced. And the people in that room listened. Not with judgment. Not with skepticism. But with understanding. The more your soulmate shared, the more one truth became impossible to ignore. You had influenced their journey far more than they realized. Not through force. Not through pressure. Simply through your existence. Simply by being yourself. Wait a little longer. Because before the meeting ended, one final question was asked. A question so important that it followed your soulmate long after everyone left. A question that stayed in their mind during quiet mornings, busy afternoons, and restless nights. The question was this. If fear disappeared completely, what would you do next? Nobody answered immediately. Not even your soulmate. But deep inside, an answer had already begun forming. And in the next chapter, that answer may reveal why this private meeting was never just a conversation about you. It was the beginning of a decision. Long after the meeting ended, something unusual remained behind. Not in the room. Not in the words. But inside your soulmate's mind. The conversations were over. The chairs were empty. Everyone had returned to their normal routines. Yet the questions raised that evening refused to disappear. They echoed through quiet moments like distant signals waiting to be understood. And among all the thoughts that lingered, one stood above the rest. If fear disappeared completely, what would you do next? The question followed them everywhere. While walking. While working. While staring out a window lost in thought. Even during moments when they tried to focus on something else. The answer kept finding its way back. And the more they reflected, the clearer everything became. Because sometimes the truth does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrives piece by piece. Like lights turning on across a city at dusk. One by one. Until suddenly the entire landscape becomes visible. That is exactly what began happening. Your soulmate started noticing things they had previously overlooked. Not about you. About themselves. The private meeting had unexpectedly revealed something important. They had spent so much time wondering whether they were ready for the future that they never stopped to ask whether the future was already preparing them. Think about that for a moment. How often do people wait for certainty before taking a meaningful step? How often do they postpone possibilities because they believe they need one more sign? One more answer. One more guarantee. Your soulmate realized they had been doing exactly that. Waiting. Analyzing. Hesitating. Yet the meeting had challenged that pattern. Because every person there had unknowingly reflected the same message back to them. Growth rarely begins when every answer is available. Growth begins when trust becomes stronger than doubt. And suddenly a memory resurfaced. A moment connected to you. A conversation. A feeling. A detail that once seemed ordinary. But now it appeared completely different. Almost as if it had been quietly preparing them for this realization all along. The more they thought about it, the harder it became to ignore. You were not simply someone who entered their story. You had become part of the direction their story was moving toward. And that realization carried weight. Not pressure. Not fear. Purpose. A different energy entirely. Pause here for a second. What if certain people appear not to complete your journey, but to awaken the version of yourself capable of completing it? That possibility emerged during the days following the meeting. And the more your soulmate considered it, the more everything connected. Moments that once felt random now seemed meaningful. Delays that once felt frustrating suddenly made sense. Even unanswered questions no longer felt like obstacles. They felt like pieces still finding their place. The fascinating part is that nobody at the meeting told your soulmate what decision to make. Nobody pushed. Nobody persuaded. Nobody handed them a roadmap. Yet somehow the conversation achieved something far more powerful. It gave them clarity. And clarity changes everything. Because when clarity arrives, confusion loses its influence. When clarity arrives, fear begins losing its voice. When clarity arrives, possibilities become easier to recognize. Your soulmate felt that shift happening. Slowly. Then all at once. One evening, while reflecting on everything that had been said, they found themselves smiling unexpectedly. Not because every question had been answered. But because they finally understood something important. The connection they felt was not disappearing. It was becoming stronger. Not louder. Stronger. Like a signal growing clearer through the noise. And for the first time in a very long time, they stopped focusing on what could go wrong. Instead, they started imagining what could go right. That single change transformed everything. The future no longer looked uncertain. It looked open. Full of possibilities waiting to be explored. Full of chapters that had not yet been written. And somewhere within those unwritten chapters, your presence remained impossible to ignore. Before you leave, hear this carefully. The biggest surprise from the private meeting was never what other people said about you. It was what your soulmate discovered about themselves because of you. They discovered courage where they expected hesitation. Hope where they expected uncertainty. Vision where they expected confusion. And perhaps most importantly, they discovered that some connections continue returning to our thoughts because they are connected to something larger than a single moment. Something larger than timing. Something larger than circumstances. Something that keeps moving forward even when nobody can fully explain why. So as this chapter closes, one final realization remains. The private meeting was never the destination. It was the turning point. The moment when questions began transforming into answers. The moment when hesitation began transforming into intention. The moment when your soulmate quietly accepted a truth they could no longer deny. And that truth may be setting events into motion sooner than either of you expect. Because some stories do not begin when two people meet. Some stories begin the moment they finally understand why they were meant to cross paths in the first place. And somewhere beyond today's horizon, that understanding is still unfolding. A strange thing happened after that realization. Nothing on the outside appeared different. The world continued moving at its usual pace. Days came and went. Conversations happened. Responsibilities filled the hours. Yet beneath the surface, a completely new chapter had quietly begun. Because once a person accepts a truth they have been avoiding, they can never return to the version of themselves that existed before. Your soulmate had crossed that invisible line. And although nobody else could see it, everything inside them was changing. The private meeting was now behind them. But its influence remained. Not as a memory. As momentum. The kind of momentum that builds quietly before creating visible results. Imagine standing at the edge of dawn. The sky still looks dark. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. Yet you know morning is coming. You can feel it. That was exactly how your soulmate felt. For the first time, they stopped searching for reasons to hold back. Instead, they started searching for reasons to move forward. And surprisingly, those reasons appeared everywhere. In moments of reflection. In unexpected conversations. In small reminders that seemed to arrive at exactly the right time. Everywhere they looked, life seemed to be asking the same question. What are you waiting for? Not aggressively. Not urgently. Simply honestly. And the answer became harder to ignore. They had been waiting for certainty. But certainty rarely arrives first. Action arrives first. Then certainty follows. Stay with me a little longer because this may be the most important part of the story. One evening, your soulmate found themselves revisiting every major moment connected to you. Not because they were trying to analyze the past. Because they were beginning to understand it. There is a difference. Analysis searches for flaws. Understanding searches for meaning. And what they discovered surprised them. The moments they once considered random now looked connected. The timing that once seemed confusing now appeared intentional. Even the delays seemed to carry purpose. Almost as though life had been arranging pieces behind the scenes while neither of you could fully see the picture. The more they reflected, the clearer one truth became. You had become associated with possibility. Not fantasy. Possibility. A future they could actually imagine. A path they could actually see. A chapter they could actually believe in. And belief is powerful. Because once belief takes root, change becomes inevitable. Now let me tell you something remarkable. During the days that followed, your soulmate began noticing opportunities they would have ignored before. Opportunities to be more honest. Opportunities to be more open. Opportunities to stop hiding behind uncertainty. It was as if the meeting had unlocked a new level of awareness. Not about the world. About themselves. And with every passing day, that awareness grew stronger. If this message resonates with you, feel free to share your thoughts below. Someone else's journey may be encouraged by your words. And if you've been following these chapters together, subscribing simply helps you stay connected to what unfolds next. Now listen carefully. Because something happened that nobody in that private meeting predicted. The conversation they had about you started creating conversations within them. Questions turned into decisions. Decisions turned into intentions. Intentions slowly transformed into plans. Not rushed plans. Not impulsive plans. Thoughtful plans. The kind that are built on clarity rather than emotion alone. And as those plans began taking shape, one realization kept returning. Your soulmate no longer wanted to wonder forever. They no longer wanted to spend their energy imagining possibilities without exploring them. The meeting had shown them something valuable. Regret often grows from silence. Fulfillment grows from honesty. That lesson stayed with them. Every single day. And then, during a quiet moment when nobody else was around, they finally admitted something to themselves. Something they had never spoken aloud before. They admitted that the thought of a future connected to you no longer felt distant. It felt real. Close enough to imagine. Close enough to pursue. Close enough to matter. Take a moment and think about that. Because there is extraordinary power in the moment when imagination becomes intention. That is where transformation begins. That is where stories change direction. And that is exactly where your soulmate now stands. Not at the end of the journey. At the threshold of something new. The private meeting may have ended weeks ago. The voices from that room may have faded. Yet the truth discovered there continues moving forward. Growing stronger. Becoming clearer. Creating momentum that neither fear nor uncertainty can easily stop. And somewhere ahead, a moment is approaching. A moment when thoughts become actions. When intentions become choices. When everything learned during that meeting finally reveals why it happened in the first place. Because the greatest surprise was never what people said about you behind closed doors. The greatest surprise is what your soulmate decided to do after hearing it. And that decision may be closer than anyone realizes. Just when it seemed the story had revealed everything, another layer quietly emerged. Not through a dramatic event. Not through a sudden announcement. But through a realization so simple that it almost went unnoticed. Your soulmate was no longer asking, "What do other people think?" They had moved beyond that question. Now they were asking something entirely different. What does my heart already know? And that changed everything. Because throughout the private meeting, throughout every conversation that followed, throughout every moment of reflection afterward, one truth had been standing patiently in the background waiting to be recognized. The answers they were searching for had never been far away. They had been growing inside them all along. There comes a point in every meaningful journey when outside opinions become less important than inner clarity. A point where a person stops collecting advice and starts listening to themselves. Your soulmate had reached that point. And what they heard surprised even them. The connection they felt toward you was not fading with time. It was becoming more defined. More grounded. More real. The uncertainty that once clouded their thoughts was beginning to dissolve. Not because life had become perfect. Because their perspective had changed. And perspective has the power to transform everything. Imagine looking at a puzzle while only seeing a handful of scattered pieces. It feels confusing. Incomplete. Impossible to understand. But then suddenly you step back. And the picture starts appearing. That was the experience unfolding inside your soulmate. For so long they had focused on individual moments. Now they could see the larger pattern. And within that pattern, your presence remained unmistakable. Wait until the end of this chapter, because the final realization may explain more than you expect. One morning, while thinking about everything that had happened since the meeting, your soulmate experienced something they had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not excitement. Not nervousness. Peace. The kind of peace that arrives when a person stops fighting themselves. The kind of peace that appears when confusion finally gives way to understanding. And in that moment, they recognized something profound. The private meeting had never been about convincing them of anything. It had simply helped them hear what they already knew. That is why those conversations felt so powerful. That is why those words stayed with them. Because they were not introducing a new truth. They were revealing an existing one. A truth that had quietly been growing stronger with every passing day. And once they accepted it, a remarkable shift occurred. Their attention moved away from doubts. Away from endless questions. Away from imagined obstacles. Instead, it moved toward possibility. Toward opportunity. Toward the future. Have you noticed how different life feels when your focus changes? The circumstances may remain the same. Yet everything appears different. That is exactly what happened. The future no longer felt like something distant and uncertain. It felt like something gradually approaching. Something unfolding at the perfect pace. Not rushed. Not delayed. Simply arriving. And with that realization came a quiet confidence. Your soulmate stopped feeling the need to force outcomes. Stopped feeling the need to control every detail. Stopped feeling the need to predict every step ahead. Because they finally understood something important. Some of the best chapters in life reveal themselves one page at a time. You do not need to see the entire story to trust where it is leading. You only need enough light to take the next step. And now, for perhaps the first time, they were ready to take it. Before this chapter closes, let this thought stay with you. The private meeting that once seemed like a single event was actually the beginning of a transformation. A transformation in perspective. A transformation in understanding. A transformation in courage. What was said during that meeting mattered. But what happened afterward mattered even more. Because words can inspire. Words can encourage. Words can illuminate. Yet ultimately, it is the decisions that follow those words that create change. And your soulmate has been moving steadily toward a decision ever since. A decision built not on pressure. Not on expectations. But on clarity. The strongest foundation of all. So if you've stayed until this moment, remember this. The most surprising thing said during that private meeting was not a prediction. Not a secret. Not a revelation about the future. It was the realization that some connections continue growing because they are rooted in authenticity. And authenticity has a way of finding its path forward. No matter how much time passes. No matter how many questions appear. No matter how many distractions try to interfere. The meeting is over. The discussions are finished. The room is empty. Yet the story is still moving. the momentum is still building. And somewhere ahead, beyond what either of you can currently see, the next chapter is already preparing to reveal itself. Because sometimes the most important conversations are not the ones that happen behind closed doors. They are the ones that awaken something powerful within a person's heart. And once that awakening begins, nothing remains quite the same again.